and welcome. My name is Julie Noblet. I'm the Energy and Climate Program Director at Acterra. And I want to thank you all for really coming and helping us kick off the 2019 spring lecture series. I'm really delighted that you're here. Kristy Drutman is our panel moderator in the blue. She's host of Brown Girl Green, a podcast and media series dedicated to critical conversations around building an environmentally just society. Cambria Bartlett and Shay Barton, both 14 years old and members of Heirs To Our Oceans. The Heirs are just now back today from Sacramento, where they met with 11 California legislators and staffers to talk about regulations around chemical fertilizer runoff, offshore drilling, plastic pollution, and the importance of protecting our deep sea. I can't wait to hear from them. And then last but not least, Mercedes Thompson, who's a student at Stanford, a Brower Youth Award winner, and co-founder of a youth-led organization, Baltimore Beyond Plastic, which she co-founded in her junior year of high school. Her organization pursued a legislative campaign that resulted in the city of Baltimore, the Baltimore City Council, unanimously passing a styrofoam ban in Baltimore. So our speaker, yes. That is applause-worthy. So our speakers have kindly agreed to stay for Q&A at the end. And I do ask that you hold your questions, if possible, to the end, so that everyone gets a chance to speak. And with that, please join me in welcoming our panel. I turn it over to Kristy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristy Drutman, and I am the host of a podcast and media series called Brown Girl Green. But that just was basically the past year and a half of my life. Before that, I've been an environmental youth activist for around 6 years, I would like to say. But before that, even, I would like to talk about my childhood. So I grew up in a very conservative hometown in Southern California, very Republican, very not committed to environmentalism. And I grew up near a freeway and didn't really draw the connections on like why it had such a low lung capacity. I just was like, oh, that's just how it is. I kind of care about helping people. Maybe I'll think about like how I can help people. And then I took an AP environmental science course my senior year of high school, and it just kind of pieced everything together for me where I was like, oh, the environment, that's a really important way to help people. And so I decided to study environmental policy and city planning in undergrad at UC Berkeley, where I graduated in 2017, go Bears. And I entered my field. I know you all are probably hating me right now. It's fine. This is a great start to the evening. But when I started studying environmental science, I started getting a little like frustrated with like how stagnant my studies were. So I decided to just like jump like headfirst into environmental activism. Went to my first ever Power Shift, which is a super huge youth environmental conference in the US, and just kind of got like sucked into it. I got really into anti-fracking campaigns in California. Was speaking in front of crowds of thousands of people, telling them we need to ban fracking in California, and was really excited about the movement and what it meant to be a young person, to be a part of it. But as time went on and I saw that my family was really confused about what I was doing, I grew up in a Filipino-American household, and I just started to realize more and more how weird it was that I was in the environmental field, because I just kept looking around me and I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And I started getting a little frustrated because I was dealing with issues with my mental health and issues around hearing about my family back in the Philippines being affected by typhoons, and really just seeing that that wasn't reflected in the environmental movement. I didn't see other Filipino Americans that were really not necessarily passionate, but like involved or directly like talking about these things. And I just started to explore further and further, why are there not more people of color in leadership positions or deeply involved in the environmental movement? And I started to wonder, like, what is the broader implications for that of the climate movement? How do we incorporate more diverse voices in leadership positions to have a seat at the table in storytelling around environmental issues? How do we not just make it a one perspective, one siloed issue? Because if we are going to create a collective movement, if we are going to shift consciousness of people in our communities, we need to be addressing environmental racism that has been prevalent in the US and around the world. And I think that I wanted to create a platform that touches on that, and that's why I thought of the idea of creating my own show, Brown Girl Green, and it's still obviously in the works, and I'm just in the beginnings of it, to basically talk about my experiences as a Filipino American in the environmental movement and how I even got here, because it's still confusing for my family, but they attended a march that I actually helped organize back in September, the Rise for Climate Jobs and Justice March in San Francisco. And just having my parents there 6 years later, or I guess it was 5 years later, after years of not being able to explain to them what I was doing, I think I'm starting to develop a concrete language of what this movement means to me as a young person and why I want others to get involved. So that's basically what I'm about. What I do on the daily is just thinking about social media, storytelling, and how I can be a voice and a voice for other people that look like me, because I didn't really have that as I've been navigating this path. And I think that a lot of environmental justice organizers, like the ones we have here in this room, are doing such important work, and I just think that there needs to be more platforms and spaces for them to raise their voice and that others can support them because they are doing the work for climate resilience. They are doing the work to push for the solutions we need in our communities. So yeah, that's what I'm about. And that's me. and this is like my little video about what I do. Hi, my name's Kristy, and I'm starting my own podcast called Brown Girl Green. Brown Girl Green comes from the many stories and experiences I've received from people outside of the environmental community who find that traditional environmentalism is a privileged, inaccessible lifestyle and movement for the liberal elite. So this all started when I attended this mind-blowing environmental conference my freshman year, where this white woman stood up and asked these panelists, "Why is no one taking action on climate? We should care about the birds and the bees and the trees. So why is no one taking action on any of this?" And this empowered Black woman stood up, took a deep breath, and she said, "You know, I come from Detroit, and I live where there's a factory polluting from upstream down to my water supply. So I would love to care about the birds and the bees and the trees, but first, I have to care about my babies who are sick, my community who is dying, and just trying to survive by living paycheck to paycheck." So, we can't be talking about Yosemite if we're not even talking about Flint. We can't talk about farmers markets if we're not talking about food insecurity. And we can't even begin to talk about shifting to a clean energy future if we don't address the economic injustice and racial injustice that is running rampant across our country today. So my goal and vision for Brown Girl Green is that we can change the story of what it means to be an environmentalist in the 21st century, and that we can come up with practical and feasible solutions to climate change that work for each and every one of us. So come join me and join this story. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cambria, and I'm 14 years old. So I want to start a bit about how I got involved in the environmental movement. Ever since I was little, I was really connected to nature, and my parents and my grandparents always taught me to pick up litter when I saw it. That's little me up there. So I was really passionate about the environment already. So when my friend asked me if I wanted to be part of an ocean project, I said sure. So this is a picture of us at the beginning. This is a group of our friends, and our goal was to make a movie. And we wanted to make a movie that would document the different impacts humans are having on our oceans. So while we were trying to film and create this movie, we really saw an upswell of youth that wanted to get involved. So our mission kind of changed from a movie to a movement. And now we have kids around the world working to protect our oceans. And we're still in the process of working our movement that is, making our movie that is going to be now documenting that movement. This is a picture from 2016. It's in Palau. These are some of the heirs there. Palau is in Micronesia across our Pacific Ocean. And these were the first kids that were really passionate in starting that movement. And now we have multiple chapters in Palau, and they're doing incredible work to protect their waters. We also have Heirs To Our Oceans chapters in California. That's a picture from Southern California. And then this is a picture from Oxford Elementary School in Berkeley. That was a picture after they talked to their city council. They were trying to get their legislators to support the Berkeley Ordinance to reduce single-use plastics. Some of you might have heard of that. So that successfully passed. These super incredible elementary school kids that are working to protect our oceans. You also might be surprised to hear that we have a chapter in Kentucky. All of our water is connected from our rivers to our oceans to our drinking water. So all of our chapters and other individual heirs are working to one goal, to protect our oceans for future generations. These are some pictures from the climate march last Friday. One of our heirs was speaking there. We also table and talk at different events and conferences. We talk to our legislators and motivate youth around the world to protect our oceans. Me and Shay, like was mentioned earlier, we were just in Sacramento talking to our legislators, asking them to support bills to reduce fertilizer runoff, plastic pollution, protect deep sea habitat. One of our main focuses is our Summit for Empowerment, Action, and Leadership, our SEAL camp. So the last 2 years, we hosted our camp in Micronesia, and we brought youth from all over Micronesia. They were fully sponsored to go to our camp, and at our camp, they learned about human impacts on our oceans through project-based learning. We went out into the field and learned from scientists. We also made films about different human impacts on our oceans that were submitted to film festivals, such as the San Francisco International Ocean Film Festival. Another really important thing that we learned is presentation and leadership skills. So this year, we're going to be doing our camp a bit differently. We're going to be hosting it here in California, and it's really going to focus on bringing back leaders from our past camps and from our chapters and developing our empathetic leadership skills and learning more about our oceans so that we can collaborate on solutions and bring together youth. So now I'm going to pass it off to Shay, and she's going to share a bit about her experience at camp and what her chapter's been doing.
Hey everybody, my name's Shay. I'm a freshman at Pescadero High School. And I'm a member of the Pescadero Middle and High School Public School chapter of Heirs To Our Oceans. So I just want to ask a quick question. How many of you know where Pescadero is? Awesome, that is so many more people than I expected. Usually nobody knows anything about us. So for those of you who don't know, we are a tiny little town on the California coast. We are mostly agricultural. We're surrounded by local farms. Our town is actually really, really beautiful. I feel really lucky to live there. My high school has a total of 80 kids. We're tiny. But despite that, we've got a very passionate, very strong Heirs To Our Oceans chapter there. So a lot of the work that we've been doing has been centered around mobilizing our community towards a more sustainable lifestyle. We were successful in getting single-use plastics out of our school cafeteria. We've been doing a lot of work helping local events manage their waste. And we've been approaching our school about converting entirely to solar power, which we hope that we'll be able to do eventually. We're also approaching local businesses about more sustainable options. So one of the things about Pescadero is that, like a lot of small agricultural towns, we're an underserved community. Our groundwater has been poisoned from nitrates due to the fertilizer runoff from local agriculture. And our town doesn't actually have the money to put in an effective filtration system. So one of the things that's happening is we haven't had clean tap water at our school to drink for many years, and a lot of the families on the surrounding ranches have to buy clean water so that their kids can drink and even so that their kids can bathe, which, you know, we live surrounded by really wealthy communities, and yet we're not able to get clean drinking water for our own kids. So I was lucky enough to last year attend the Summit for Empowerment Action and Leadership Camp in Palau in Micronesia, which 2018, summer of 2018. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. I cannot stress that enough. When we talk about this camp in presentations, I don't think it fully conveys the power and the impact it had on us as individuals. So Palau, when I was there, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Pescadero, which is funny because it's like all the way across the world. But I was like, hey, you know, this is a tiny community. They all know each other. They're all connected to each other and to their natural environment. And I felt really connected there. I was like, I vibe with this, you know. And another thing about Palau is that they're also facing horrible environmental degradation. They're losing the seafood that they depend on because they're a fishing culture. They're losing their homes to sea level rise. Native sea turtle nesting grounds are being threatened by an influx of plastic pollution. A lot of native ecosystems are being devastated by the bad habits of tourists. And what Palau is facing isn't due to the people's actions, it's due to the actions of larger industrialized nations whose governments have no check on their manufacturing or on their financial greed. And a lot of parallels can be drawn, too, between what is happening in Palau and what is happening to underserved communities in the States, like when we talk about tragedies like Flint, Michigan. And a thing I want to say is that there's a much more hopeful message to draw, though, from the connections between what's happening in Palau and what's happening in the US, which is that while there I learned that even though we're all technically divided by this one ocean, we are all on this planet connected by it too. We're connected by our need for it, and we are connected by our love for it. And while I was in Palau, it was cemented in my mind that if we keep forming human connections and keep pushing to get the voices of people most impacted by environmental degradation at the table, we will be able to solve the problems our planet is facing for us, for my generation, for everyone, and everybody who comes after. So, are you speaking, Mercedes? Did I hand it up to you? Okay. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mercedes Thompson. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm a freshman at Stanford. I have a couple questions I'd like to pose to you guys. Can you raise your hands if you're in elementary school? Don't be shy. Can you raise your hands if you're in middle school? Can you raise your hands if you're in high school? And can you raise your hands if you've been out of school for a very long time? So my story starts when I was in elementary school, so when I was quite a long time ago. And I remember we were raising diamondback terrapins in our first grade classroom, and we were learning about the Chesapeake Bay and how much pollution there was. Fast forward a couple years, and I was in middle school, and I was helping out in the recycling club, as one does, and helping with plastic cleanups around Baltimore City. And then fast forward a couple more years, and I was in high school, in my junior year, and my best friend and I were in an internship together at the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, being funded by the Baltimore Community Foundation. And through that position, we heard about this styrofoam ban that was going through the Maryland Assembly. And we were like, why are they trying to pass a styrofoam ban? Yeah, we get that it's an environmental issue, but they haven't even passed a plastic bag ban yet. And so we looked into a little bit more, and we learned that styrofoam, when you put hot food on it, leaches chemicals into the food. And that was shocking to us because we had been eating off of styrofoam trays since kindergarten in our cafeterias. And we were really concerned, and we wanted to see this bill passed. And so we went around and we started off by surveying local markets to just see how much styrofoam is being used in small businesses around Baltimore. And then we had the idea to go to our Baltimore City Council and meet with each individual council member. So we emailed them, said we were high school students and we wanted to talk to them about a styrofoam ban that was going through the Maryland General Assembly. And they were excited to meet with us. And so we went and we met with them, and we asked them whether or not they would support the Maryland state ban. And they said yes. And so we helped them draft up a resolution that basically said that Baltimore City supported the bill. And it passed unanimously our junior year, which was really exciting for us because I had never had lobbying or legislative experience before. And then from there, we decided that it would be really cool if we could get a bunch of high school students, middle school students, and even elementary school students to come down to Annapolis, which is the capital of Maryland, to talk to the senators themselves. And we got funding from our job through the Baltimore Community Foundation. And so it was really amazing to be able to see all of these kids that we had met with go and talk to their senators. Unfortunately, that year the bill didn't pass. Which was really disappointing. And so we spent that summer after junior year trying to figure out, what do we do next? And at that point, we had already realized that we had developed a relationship with our Baltimore City Council members at that point. And we were like, why don't we try a citywide styrofoam bill? The problem was that the bill had failed 3 times before when it was introduced in the couple years before. But we said, they really want the youth perspective on this, and we're being directly impacted by styrofoam in our schools and in our communities. What a lot of people don't know is that there's an incinerator within the city limits of Baltimore. And when you burn styrofoam, it actually releases all of these chemicals into the air, which we then breathe in. And Baltimore has a huge asthma problem. So the incinerator and the styrofoam that was going into it definitely wasn't helping. So we went to the Baltimore City Council and we pitched our idea, and they said, it's not likely it's going to pass, but we'll give it a try. And we met with all the city council members, and my senior year of high school, instead of hanging out with my friends, I was going to all the different high schools around Baltimore City, all of the different middle schools, and giving presentations after school to their environmental clubs to see whether or not there was student support for it. And there was. Everyone, when I told them about the styrofoam trays, they were horrified, and they were like, we need to get these out. And we were actually reached out to by the director of food and nutrition with Baltimore City Schools, who was like, hey, we heard about the work you guys are doing, and we want to get styrofoam trays out before the Baltimore City Council even passes this bill. And so we worked with them over the course of several months, and we were able to get compostable trays in January. And then in all of the schools, which was amazing to see because we'd line up in the cafeterias and they'd hand us a tray and we'd be like, wow, compostable, we did this. And then, since we had all this student support and everyone was on board, we were like, okay, we're going to have a rally just to show the city council what's up and show them, this is something that the youth of Baltimore City actually support. And the city council president, he was like, this bill, it's going to hurt small businesses, it's anti-small business, I can't support this bill. And we went around and we surveyed we heard this information from him, and we were like, okay, this is what we have to do. So we went and surveyed small businesses from all sorts of neighborhoods in Baltimore. And we got, I think, over 100 signatures and letters of support. But it wasn't until he met with students that we had talked to that he realized that this was a very serious issue, which goes to show that even if like trained lobbyists can't convince them, hearing it from like elementary school students really makes a difference. And so the bill passed unanimously. And Baltimore City is currently in the process of transitioning out styrofoam from food service all over the city, which is really incredible. And I just learned this recently, but Maryland is also set to be the first state to ban styrofoam as well. It's on Governor Hogan's desk now, so it's really incredible. Yeah. I'm gonna pass the microphone back to you.
Cool. Well, as you can see, this is going to be a really exciting conversation. It already has been, but I'm so excited to be with all of you. And I think that youth organizing and environmental organizing is really what will shift and change the world. So you all really are just so inspiring. Can we get another like round of applause? They're just so cool. They're so cool. So I just wanted to ask you all, like, just to start off with, like, what sparked, if you could pinpoint something that might have sparked your interest to be an environmental activist, like, can you trace that? Was it a movie, a mentor, an experience? I'm just really curious, like, what got you into any of this?
Should I just start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I think there's like 3 steps to mine. Is it cool if I just like, it's kind of a chronology. So I live in the woods pretty much. I just live like way back in the trees, whatever. And as a young kid, I was always like crawling around in the dirt. You know, my mom had to pull bugs out of my hands so I wouldn't eat them, whatever. And I've developed like a really deep connection just with like the environment around me. I was really lucky that I had that as a kid. So, you know, when I was little, I was always like, oh, birds, trees, love them. And then I never really understood that they were threatened. Like I understood that I should be recycling and whatever, but public school education didn't really give me a conception of like how titanic the issues like facing my planet and my life really were. So I was just like, oh yeah, you know, love the environment. And then she, I believe, and some other of her friends approached me because they'd started Heirs To Our Oceans like 2 years back, and they were like, hey, would you be interested in joining this? And I was like, oh yeah, totally, I'm so down. I love the planet and I love nature. So I started doing this, and at first, it still wasn't really like sinking in just how important this work was. It was, to be honest, just more something that I found fun. Like I was getting out of the house and I was learning and I was seeing things. And then I think like what really sparked like dedication and passion and like care in me was that trip to Palau. Because like I saw what people over there were going through and I connected the dots between that and what's going on everywhere else. And I saw this incredible ecosystem, like a tropical ecosystem, which I'd never seen before, only like in pictures. And it was like the most beautiful place I've ever seen in my whole life. And I met some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my whole life. And like that experience has become so much a part of who I am. And now, like when I do this and when I pick up a microphone and I talk to people, I have something to say. You know, and I care about this, and I think it's really because of that experience and because of what I saw over in Palau.
I have a very similar story to Shay. I always grew up playing at beaches, playing creeks, and out in the redwoods. And I always cared about the environment, but I never really thought about how we might be impacting. I thought that maybe my family was very eco-friendly. We recycled and stuff like that. So until I started researching the problems, I didn't realize the impact that my everyday life was having on our oceans. And joining Heirs To Our Oceans and seeing the youth that were empowered to join us, that really is keeping me going, and that's what really sparked that passion, is to see other youth involved and caring about protecting their worlds.
I have a similar experience as well. I think I definitely enjoying nature when I was younger really contributed to my love in the environment. But I think it was the fact that, the issues that we were facing with styrofoam and seeing plastics in our water in the Inner Harbor and seeing the puffs of smoke from the incinerator were really what made me take that next step, and seeing how it was directly impacting my community and the people around me.
Awesome. I just wanted to move into what we all know just happened on Friday, which was the climate strikes. Millions of students around the world protested and demanded that world leaders make a change about climate inaction. And I know that some of you, I don't know if you did also, but I know that you two were a part of those strikes. But I think an issue that has been brought up, or in the conversations on the interwebs of young people, has been, well, it's really nice that people around the world, in mainstream media, are talking about youth taking action on climate change, but it could be youth are taking action on climate change, or oh, that's so cute, the young people are taking action on climate change. The tone and the intent around that makes a huge difference on whether or not older folks and people in positions of power are actually going to take action. So I'm just interested, as young people, how do we move the ball, from just being tokens of young people, the young faces of the environmental movement, to actually holding people accountable, that we want policy change, that we want them donating money to the organizations that we're a part of. How do we channel power and resources to benefit our campaigns? Because it's so much more than being a young person's face on a screen. And I think that the climate strikes started that conversation, but I'm interested in how each of you are planning on pushing that forward.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because it's interesting and it's important to talk about, and it's a really true experience. A lot of times I've gone out at the local level or at the international level, and I'll get up and I'll be like, hey, we gotta take action, protect our environment, and people are like, oh, and then they go home and they do nothing. And quite frankly, it's been pretty hard for me to overcome in a presentation setting, when I'm interacting with people like this, and the connections I make with people are pretty fleeting a lot of the time. I think where I've really made progress with that is at the individual level, because I'm a huge advocate of getting environmental education involved in school curriculums, because the fact that kids are going through the public school system unable to articulate, the damages of climate change, ocean acidification, plastic pollution is horrible to me. It's absolutely sabotaging our generation and our future that kids just from a basic school education can't articulate this stuff. So I've been approaching, teachers, school officials, researching the curriculums that we have, hey, we need to get this stuff in our curriculum. And with my teachers at first, they're like, oh, look, the kid wants to learn something. And then what's helped me is just before I even jump into approaching them on issues, I sit down and I talk with them and I get their perspective. And I'm like, hey, what would you think about teaching this? Where are you at this point? What have you done in your classroom? And they kind of open up and they share some stuff with me. And then I can kind of respond to that. And we end up having a conversation. And then before I'm even preaching to them, there's human connection there. And that forces them to acknowledge my humanity and the fact that I'm not a cute kid on a screen. I am a person who is able to articulate their opinion on a real world issue who they should be listening to and considering. So I'm still trying to find ways to overcome that when I'm speaking to a crowd. But at the individual level, I think it's really important to just establish a connection before you try to talk too much about your own agenda, is what I've found.
I definitely agree with Shay. I think Education is a huge thing, and I personally think that one of the greatest threats to our planet is a lack of knowledge. We need to learn about these issues and care about and be connected with our environment before we can take those steps to protect it. And I think specifically with the climate march, I think it's raised a huge amount of an awareness. And I think that maybe our next step is going to our legislators. And I have seen the last, yesterday and then the last 2 years before that, I went to DC and talked with our congresspersons. And they listen to the youth. They are really impressed that we're in there and voicing our opinions. And they listen to what we say and what we think. Last year, we set up a couple of meetings with people that were not necessarily environmentally minded. And it was very interesting to, like Shay was saying, open up, see what their opinions are on these environmental issues. I found that a lot of them actually did care a lot about the environment, but they weren't sure how to take the next step, and they were worried about their people and how they would be impacted by environmental legislation. So it's very interesting to hear those different points of views, and I think it's really important to talk to our legislators and get their opinions and feedback and give them our ideas surrounding these issues.
That's a wonderful question. I think there's a world of difference between going up to a legislator and being like, wow, we have an issue with plastics, I see it in our waters, and going up to them and saying, hey, these are the facts about plastics, this is why this is bad, and I've seen it in our community. And I think having youth that are intelligent in the subjects that they're discussing and have the facts and the research to back it up is so vital in any movement, but especially in helping to support the fact that, we aren't just students that are being told by some adult, this is bad, this is why you should support it. Which is why when we were going to all of the middle and high schools, we didn't just tell them, this is the issue with styrofoam, we have all this trash in our cafeterias because of the styrofoam trays. We said, these are the reasons why, this is the research, and we let them form their own conclusions on whether or not they would support it. So I think having that research to back it up is incredibly vital.
Just want to acknowledge, I love what you said. Thank you so much, Mercedes.
And building off of all of that you all just said, I think another misconception is that the older generation are kind of exempt from doing anything about climate change anymore because they're like, it's going to be the young people that are doing it. But I think that's a bit frustrating also because it's well, that ends a conversation. It ends that older people also have the agency that they can do something about the issue. It's also this idea of youth vitality, and that's all of these images and ideas of what a young person is and why we're capable of making change. I think that it's in some ways excludes older folks from both the responsibility, but also a space for them to feel young again and be involved in these things in a very creative and engaging way. And I'm just interested in all of your perspectives of how do you feel older people I have to be very sensible saying it. The older generation, how can we bridge the gap between our worlds? Because we do activism through social media and mediums like that, and it may look different for the older generation who may not be on those platforms. So how do you see in your own experience with your campaigns that older folks can engage with you and feel they're a part of the work that you're doing?
Well, a lot of it, I think, for me has been learning from each other. I think it's mutual acknowledgement that the older generation has things to learn from the younger generation, and that we have so much to learn from the older generation, because I think what happens a lot of the times with young activists like myself is we get really caught up in our, activism, and we're oh boy, we're gonna make so much change, and that's great. We need that motivation, we need that inspiration, but we can't, forget the wisdom of previous generations. So I think like, if I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody who comes from a different time than myself, if I'm like going into it with the mindset that I know everything and that I know like exactly what is right, then the conversation isn't going to go anywhere, because there may well be something that I haven't thought about, that I have neglected to acknowledge, that I still need to learn. And I think that's applicable to a lot of things, like just communicating between individuals, communicating like across cultural boundaries. Like I think that's always something we need to keep in mind whenever we're trying to communicate with somebody about change we're trying to make, is like mutual learning and mutual understanding and acceptance.
I think the communication and learning is also really important. I've been working with a scientist to learn and study about plastic pollution, so I do think that's really important to pass down that knowledge to the younger generation. And my mentor in plastic pollution, Dr. Chelsea Rockman, she's been super supportive of my work and helping share research, her research with me. I also feel like what the past generations can do is let us into these types of conversations. We've seen pushbacks before on like scientific conferences where they're like not sure, do we really want a youth voice in here? But once we're in there, they really see the power that we have, and they acknowledge the importance of letting us in on those conversations and letting our voice be heard. And I think that's really important.
I remember giving a talk similar to this one on styrofoam at a community center. And this older gentleman comes up to me, long white beard, and he's like, I'd love to stay in touch. Can I have your email? And I'm like, sure, yeah. And the next day, I look in my inbox, and there's this very long email with like a lot of research that he had done on the subject. And I was really impressed. And I think what a lot of us realize as we get older, that we become more and more pressed for time. And it's been really wonderful to see like all of the older people like getting involved with our work back in Baltimore, because they're retired and they have so much more time on their hands to help contribute to our campaign. And we can't discount their time, because we need all the time we can get. We're pressed for time as is. And it was really lovely having their support and keeping them engaged, because this is an issue that's going to affect all of us.
Great. And it just keeps spurting it out of you. Like, I want to know all the answers. I'm just interested in like, how have you found both opportunities but also challenges to engage people in your campaigns, just from like a purely like storytelling outreach perspective? I'm just really interested in how you've been able to bring people in. I think you all talking about like learning and mutual respect and learning how to strategically communicate is really critical for the climate fight. So I'm just wondering, I'm just curious, like what has worked for you and what has been really difficult in pulling your messaging across to others?
My mother is a really incredible woman. Her name's Kelly Munoz. She is one of the strongest people I've ever met. She's every single topic, every single thing she doesn't agree with, she's out there. She's fighting. She's like, she wants, and she gets things done. She's like a huge role model for me. And when I was young, she was like, you're a woman growing up in this world. You need to be outspoken. You need to make sure people hear your voice. And I internalized that. And boy, was I outspoken. Yeah, I talked a lot. And everybody had to hear what I had to say. And that has actually... It's so funny, because I've always been trying to be like, I'm a woman, I've got to get my voice heard in like our patriarchal society. And then like I'm going into these conversations and I'm like, I need to step back. Like I need to give other people space. This can't just be like the Shay show. Like, I mean, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Like, like I've got so much to learn from other people, and a lot of the times there are like groups of people who don't get like the space to make their voices heard on these issues. And like that's been one of the challenges, like my personal challenges is I've not always succeeded, I've slipped up, but I've been trying like really hard to just step back and give people space and give people time.
I think one very important thing that I've found when communicating with youth is that we need youth educating youth, because they're in school all day and they're hearing from adults and maybe not everything is sinking in with them. But I have seen when we go in and present to youth, they're really inspired because they can see themselves and they can see what they can potentially do. And that really can be empowering for them.
I can't agree enough with what you said. You could feel the energy in the rooms shift from when the teacher is up there talking, and then someone that looks like them, who's around their age, like going up there and speaking, because it has so much more of an impact. Another thing that we considered pretty heavily when figuring out like the messaging behind our movement was the fact that like generally when people think of environmentalism, they usually think of like the typical like hiker, person who really likes being outdoors, and a lot of people in Baltimore City haven't had that opportunity, just because of the fact that we're in the inner city and we're surrounded by concrete all the time. And so we really wanted to shift our messaging away from like environmentalism being as something that like people do because they enjoy being outside in nature and hiking, to something that's directly impacting them, to hit closer to home.
Well, I guess I'm going to end our discussion to get to the Q&A, but I want to ask my last question to these awesome young people who have blown me away, honestly, tonight. I just want to know, like, what if there was one thing you would want everyone in this audience to walk away with, like one tangible action you would want them to do, one resource or one takeaway that you want them to take home with them, what would it be?
I think mine is like be conscious of your actions and like know what the consequences of your actions are. And like if you're gonna like maybe like use a plastic bag or whatever, consume like fast food, beef, like whatever it is, like all of those personal choices, like up to you. But I think just the really important thing is for just everyone to educate themselves on what consequences their actions might have and like know what effect they can have on the world. So I don't think it would be so much like one thing I would want everybody in this room to do, because I don't know like what people's capabilities are in their lives, but like I think every single person has a responsibility to be educated about what their choices and what their impacts have.
Yeah, I think the kind of backbone of all these issues and what we've been talking today is knowledge and sharing it and receiving it and educating yourself. I think letting everyone in on the table and hearing different points of views and opinions is really important in this movement.
I think what a lot of people don't remember is that organizations or even movements aren't built in a day. And it usually starts because of one step. And you just have to identify an issue in your community, whether or not that's, a lack of recycling bins in your schools and, deciding to tackle that and get those implemented, and just building from there. You don't need to set out with the idea of, I'm going to start this big thing. It starts with a small idea and you build from there. And we're all up here after several years of having done this work. So please don't feel like this isn't something that you could personally do, because it definitely is.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm sure you have questions for this group. So we'll do a few minutes of Q&A, and Hillary has a mic. And so if you raise your hand, she will come to you, and then we can hear your question.
Hi, my name is Doug Silverstein. I'm from Burlingame, very inspired by all you guys. I was at the Climate March last Friday. I saw Sophie from Pescadero get up and speak. She was awesome. My question is, what adult organizations have you interacted with where there's been some success, not just going to a council member, but some environmental organization that you think you've worked with well, or maybe one that you didn't and you wish you could?
I would say, like, from my experience, I worked with a lot of different big, like, green NGOs. I think, like, I guess I want to keep it vague because I don't want to be saying names, but I think I want to say, like, what I think organizations have done positively versus not as positively that I've seen. Positively, I've seen organizations who are able to really funnel their resources to communities that are doing on-the-ground work, like environmental justice communities, like organizations that are very conscious about their partnerships with frontline communities and are like very much about like partnership and consultation and really thinking about how are communities, like especially communities of color, included in the conversations around a bill or around a decision-making process. So I think like organizations who can do that very effectively, or at least accept when they do it really badly, is always great. I think that organizations that have done some things that haven't been as great is when they structure things by only giving young people unpaid internships or only giving young people like opportunities that could only be accessed by people that have more wealth or resources or access. And I think that that's a huge issue that pushes a lot of young people of color out of environmental organizations or out of positions of power. So I think that that's an issue I've seen in a lot of different environmental organizations across the board. That's an issue that really needs to be addressed, because I think that if we're talking about helping the world, we need to be talking about structural inequities in our own organizations and the work that we're doing, and really thinking critically about that.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of emphasize my experience on what you said, because like Cambria and I, and Heirs from my chapter, and Heirs from the founding chapter, and Palawan Heirs, and all of us have been together a lot and going to different conferences, going to different summits, and a lot of times kids from our organization have faced huge obstacles getting into these conferences because there's like a massive financial burden to access them that, like, you know, a lot of kids from my town just simply cannot deal with. So I think like people really need to be aware of that. Like if they're going to include youth, there can't be like these boundaries, whether they're inadvertent or otherwise, that are only letting like a certain like privileged pocket of youth into these conversations, because that's not what's going to solve the problem. And then as far as organizations we've worked positively with, I guess like Cambria, you can speak to this, because Heirs has done a lot of work with other organizations that's gone pretty well.
Yeah, we've worked with a lot of organizations that are supportive of the youth movement. I wanted to add on one more thing with the conferences is a lot of times we found that these conferences that are supposed to be youth-oriented qualify youth as 18 to like 21, and that's not our youth. Like our organization is made up from kids that are 9 to 17. We want to be seeing these youth that are still in middle school and high school. We want to see them being able to have these opportunities to be involved. And I think a lot of conferences and organizations that we've worked with, once they've seen us speak in the way that we really understand these issues, they come to recognize that we really do need to be at the front and heading these conversations.
Yeah, to build off of that, some of the adult organizations that we've worked with have been wonderful, really positive experiences just because they had that legislative background and could we could consult and guide us on our strategy in navigating these waters that we obviously never been involved with before. I think when adult organizations go awry is when they discount you or think that you don't know as much as you do. Like, I'm thinking of one organization in particular. We suggested that we meet with this particular legislator or like move forward with the campaign in some way because it had sort of reached a stalemate. And they completely shut that down and discredited us, which was really discouraging. But for the most part, the adult organizations that we've worked with have been fabulous and wonderful and very supportive.
Hi, I went to the student strike thing on Friday. I don't know if there was other people there that went to Anna Eshu's office. And the questions I heard from the youth I thought were fantastic. And it was a really exciting event overall, except for Anna Eshu's answers, which I thought some of the time were kind of discounting or not really as respectful as I would have thought. And I thought maybe she would have learned something from Dianne Feinstein's video, but it seemed like, maybe she didn't. But anyhow, one of the things I heard was adults, grown-ups haven't really done as much as they should have in terms of the climate. And I was wondering if you guys could comment on that.
I think it's complicated, but I think it's just because we were born into this world and we didn't ask for a lot of these things on how the current economic system and government and how just the planet has gotten polluted to this extent. We didn't create any of that. And I think that there's been a lot of complacency or a lot of just people seeing the issue build and build and build and just be like, someone else will take care of that, or that'll get solved one day, or the younger people are gonna deal with it. So I think that there's a lot of shame that's there. That's my theory. I think that there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt. And I think that that can be embedded in so many different aspects of our society, whether that's being a man, whether that's being white, whether that's being an older person. There's a lot of shame there. And I think that there's not enough open forums in our country today that allow us to deal with the deep emotional shame that this country has. And I think that until we're creating more of those pockets for people to address that internal shame that they have, that they're carrying around with them, we can't really move progress forward, because then people are just carrying a lot of this we're walking on eggshells, we don't know what to do, we've already messed up, what can we do? And I think that that's not creating the conversations and the solutions we need to be making people feel like they have agency to make a change. So I think that people just need to step back, identify where their shame is, identify where this is coming from, and find people who are open-minded and kind-hearted and really are willing to see them and create a dialogue to create the solutions that we need. That's my feeling about it.
Yeah, that's really important, and I really agree with that, because it's I don't want to condemn generations of people and say, you haven't done enough, because, there are so many people, so many caring, incredible people, and when I condemn an entire generation, including those people, not only am I being unjust, but I'm shutting out potential allies, out of this conversation, which, is detrimental to my own cause, right? So I think I don't think I'm qualified. Also, I didn't live through it. I didn't live through what got us to this point, and I didn't live through media presentation of the issues and a lack of widespread awareness on human impacts on the environment. I can only get that like from a different perspective. I've never lived through it, so I don't think I'm qualified really to pass a judgment on generations of people. But I will say that, in my opinion, like the responsibility is never over. Like, I don't think people are ever justified in saying, oh, I've done enough, somebody else can take it. Like, I think until we live in complete utopian harmony with our planet, like, which I don't think I'll be around to see if that happens, I think until then, I don't think it's ever okay for somebody to say, like, all right, your responsibility, I'm done, because I just think, like, if one person does that, other people see that, it gives other people an excuse to do that because they say, oh, you know, they did it, I can do it too. And that shuts out like so many more people. So yeah, I don't want to condemn generations of people, but I also don't think that anybody has a right to pass on their responsibility.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what's been said, and I think one of the hardest things that we've come across when we're talking to our legislators and trying to get legislation passed is the amount of time that it takes. Because we're youth, and this is going to be happening in our generation, and we don't really want these bills to say 2030 on them, right? We want action to be happening now, and that's not really what we're seeing, but I definitely agree with you. I think there are people out there that are really trying to push for change that's being made.
Yeah, I think the current system of pointing fingers and blaming other generations is really problematic, because you can blame like a generation and then say, oh, we're stepping up and taking over, but that just absolves the generation that you're blaming of the responsibility, and it lets them off the hook almost. So we should all be working together to be tackling these issues 100%.
Okay, so sometimes like you hear all these bad news about different things going on. So do you ever lose motivation, and what do you do when it feels really hard and you don't want to persevere?
Oh gosh, this has been my whole thing for like 6 years. Like, I actually left like environmentalism. I mean, you can't leave it. It's always in your face, but I left like doing on the ground activism for about a year when I was in college because it just became too much, and I was just like, I need to focus on school and get good grades because that's why I'm here in university. I mean, it's also to learn, but don't want to flunk. And I think that the way that I've been able to persevere is by giving myself breaks to actually like understand why I'm doing the work. It's ironic and simple, but it's been actually going out in nature when I've actually had the chance to. And those are the moments when I'm like, oh, this is why I do this. And you have to have those moments of pause. I think like for me, like I've dealt with so much like stress of just being like a high achieving person, but even on top of that of like holding so much space for myself as like a young woman of color. And like, I think my biggest advice is like, not feeling guilty when you take a break. Say no to that protest, say no to that demonstration. The movement is not gonna end. Like, that's the thing. Like your responsibility should not just be when you're like in your teens, when you're in your 20s. Your responsibility should be for a lifetime. And if you actually wanna be a lifetime activist, what I've learned is that you have to be honest about your needs. You gotta pace yourself. You gotta pace yourself because otherwise you're gonna burn out, and burnout is so real, and you're not gonna be an activist when you're 30 or 40 years old. And so if you really wanna do this for life, you have to be honest about what you need and be unapologetic about it.
I'd just like to say that for any other youth who have a question, like, it might be hard to put yourselves out there, but I think you'll be glad you did. So like, feel free to ask. And then, yeah, that question that you asked is important. I agree with what you said, like, taking the time to resource yourself is so significant because like you get caught up in all this like stuff that you're doing as an activist. And if you don't like step back, you get burnout and you get tired and you can't remember why you're doing all this work. So I think like however you personally like resource yourself and bring some harmony back into your body, like for me personally, that's usually through music, that's usually through like reading, like however you do it, it's so important to like, don't neglect yourself. And then also what's been really helpful for me personally is being part of this organization, because I have, like, I'm so lucky because I have like this global community of youth who I'm so connected to. Like, you know, Cam has helped me so much, and other heirs have helped me so much. Like, I'll get burned out, I'll get sad, I'll get tired. I'm like, why am I doing this? And like, if you find a community of like-minded young people who really care about you and what you're doing and really support you, like you can always go to them and they will build you back up, like every time. Like that will help.
I think same for me. Like seeing other youth that are empowered, that empowers me. I have so many friends that are in this movement, and we're always bringing hope to each other and reminding each other why we're doing this and why we're trying to protect our oceans. And I think having those friends and seeing other youth empowered is what really keeps us going.
Yeah, climate change can feel like this all-encompassing, like crushing thing. Like the UN says we have 12 years to completely change how we run our society, or we're basically, you know, doomed. Doomed is the right word. And it feels like if you don't stop, you know, who else is going to step up and take your place? And I think the important thing is, like you mentioned, yes, you can keep going, and you can keep going nonstop, 100 miles per hour, but if you were to get burnt out, you know, like that's like a complete stop. And that sets you back farther than taking a couple of days off or a week off to decompress and take self-care. So you might be going 50 miles per hour, but that's still better than zero. So that's, like everyone here has mentioned, self-care is so important in the environmental movement, and it's another issue why like unpaid internships are so problematic in the environmental movement, just because it makes people feel like they're not being compensated for their time, or that their work isn't actually like meaningful, because they're not being compensated.
I want to add one more thing to the self-care thing, is a lot of times when we're on long trips, like at our camp, we're worried about getting this presentation done in time, we have to prepare this paper, we're talking in front of this big congressperson, and we have all these things in our heads, and we're all nervous. And sometimes we just need to take a day and let's go to the beach and just have fun and hang out with each other. That has made such a big difference in these big trips that we go on, like to Palau and doing our youth empowerment camps. We need to just go have fun in nature.
Is it okay if I add one more thing? Like, I'm sorry, now we're just adding stuff, but like, this is just such an important thing. Like, I want to talk about this for forever. So, as a high school student, this is like kind of, I think, important to address. Is that when I've been doing this work, I've got so many kids in my school who are so supportive. And then, you know, there are always going to be those kids who mock me because it's not cool to care. And they're like, you know, oh, like you're with Heirs To Our Oceans. That's not cool. And like, I've had that happen. And I think it's important to acknowledge that like for teenagers in a public high school setting, that like may happen, probably will happen. And like, it's important to get past that, because like the people who are saying that to you, you know, they care too. They just don't feel comfortable articulating it. And like, I'm lucky that I can get past that barrier and articulate myself. And I think like people who say things like that, like we need to view them with understanding, like as fellow kids. And then I think like also finding your friends, like knowing whose opinions you care about and knowing who you need to be around, like to build you up.